Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the start of the 2053 offseason. The Rockies are now back-to-back World Series champions, and we are headed into our final year as general manager of the Colorado Rockies, hoping to get a three-peat. You can see we've played 32 years at this point, starting with the Kansas City Royals, moving on to the Pittsburgh Pirates, most recently with the Rockies, 25 playoff appearances, 7 championships. We did have a three-peat, about 2 decades ago at this point in Kansas City, and we are hoping to match that with the Rockies in our final year of OOTP 23 action here on our channel. And as the off-season begins, we've got a lot of money to potentially spend, but we've also got a few holes to fill on the team. We need to fill a reliever role out of our bullpen, and we would prefer if that could be someone who could be a closer. We're also going to have a hole at second base. And then following suggestions from some viewers over the last, at this point, I'd say several weeks in real time, probably the last season or two in game time, we're still thinking about looking for help at catcher and possibly third base also. So the obvious things that we need to figure out are another pitcher, and if it's a closer, that would be great, and who our starting second baseman is going to be next year. We've also got several arbitration-eligible players we need to make decisions on. Honestly, there's not a ton of decisions to be made, with the exceptions of the veteran shortstop Dave Bain, who we picked up as a minor league free agent about a year and a half ago. We're going to sign everyone to major league extensions, hopefully get them for a reasonable price. And then looking at our free agents, Danny Ruiz, our second baseman, is an option. We're going to have to figure out whether he makes sense. Love the glove, good personality, and he's been a pretty effective hitter despite a average-ish batting profile. But you can see he's been a well above average offensive player in Colorado for us over the last 3 seasons. So we'd love to keep him on board if at all possible. However, he is looking for an average of almost $28 million a year. I don't view him as a $28 million a year player, but if he's the best option out there at second base, then we'll do what we need to do to potentially keep him on board. Other than that, though, our other 3 free agents are likely to be moving on. Certainly we'll be moving on from backup catcher Chris Rodriguez and aging left-handed reliever Latrell Young. Victor Fields is a reliever that we would love to have back, another left-handed arm, but he wants to be a starter, and he also wants to be making about $13 million a year. Just not sure if that's the best way for us to spend the money. So we kind of know what we need to do. First thing as we begin this episode, I'm going to do is figure out and hopefully get out some arbitration offers to those arbitration-eligible players. And then we'll start trying to take a look at the potential free agents, seeing who might be available as a reliever, second baseman, catcher, and or third baseman for us, and start putting together a little bit of a plan as we go through awards season here in 2053. All right, we've got offers out to Lucio, Fields, Ortega, Mays, and Perez, so we should be able to hopefully bring back all 5 of the arbitration-eligible players that we'd like to. None of them were really interested in talking long-term contracts, and honestly, since we're moving on to OOTP 24 after this upcoming season, there's really no reason for us to think about long-term contracts with these players because we're going to be starting fresh in the new version of the game. And looking at the potential free agent pitchers, you can see there's no guarantees that all of these players are going to end up as free agents, but there's a pretty large crew of 3.5-star or higher players, at least according to our scout, that are going to be available. If you've been following our play with the Colorado Rockies, you'll know that we've had some pretty good success with the pitching staff, focusing on players with really good movement on their pitches, as well as ground ball tendencies. So from that perspective, our buddy Victor Fields definitely stands out as one of the potential more interesting free agents. Sal Lofton, who we actually traded for this year but is recovering from a torn elbow ligament, also fits the role. And then Manny Orozco of the Atlanta Braves right now, former closer for many seasons throughout his major league career. Actually, he wasn't been a closer all that often. I lied. I've lied to you again. He's only got 7 saves in his career, but he's been, I guess, a good reliever throughout his career. Extreme ground ball tendencies, excellent movement, his stuff in control just a little bit above average. Not typically the type of personality that we'd love to bring into our clubhouse, but I think we've got a good enough crew of characters that we could certainly handle having him on board. Do like the fact that he's an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness and certainly the 80 movement. Sean Fluellen, another guy who might work. Concern with Fluellen is the lack of control. So there's definitely prospects out there, but nobody that I really love. Turning to the potential second baseman, as we talked about in the last episode, we're familiar with a lot of these people. Demetrius Washington, we picked up at the trade deadline this year. We already talked about Danny Ruiz. Rogelio Terrazas, we traded away at the trade deadline this year. Juan Castillo was with us a couple years ago, and Tony Caceres was with us the season before last. So a lot of the top second basemen available are also players that we're pretty familiar with. The issue is that there's some pretty big ticket items out there. The catcher situation is just really not that impressive. Don't see anyone that would be a obvious candidate to supplant Alex Alvarez as our starting catcher, and although we do need a backup for him next year if he remains our starter, clearly we'd be an even better team if we're able to bring on somebody good enough to supplant him at catcher. And then potential third baseman, again, familiar names, Washington, Ruiz, Terrazas, Castillo, and Caceres all can play both of those positions, so not a lot of pure third baseman out there except for Jesus Wheaton, who's got a decent glove for third. Clearly wish his range would be better, but he's fragile. He's going to be 36 years old on New Year's Day, and I don't think he really brings much that we already aren't getting from Ortega at third base. Again, third is a position similar to catcher where in a perfect world we'd be looking for a big upgrade. So the free agent market is potentially uninspiring. But we'll keep kind of searching and thinking about what the best way to proceed with our potential free agents is, as well as whether there's anyone we might be able to pick up on the trade market. I'm assuming that right now the trade block is pretty meager. Yes, of course, right after the season ended. It doesn't look like there's going to be any real significant difference makers out there on the trade block right now. But certainly as we get closer to the season, maybe there'll be something we can do in the trade market to get this team where we want it to be. So with second base being the obvious hole that we're going to need to fill with both Ruiz and Washington as free agents, we basically just did a simple player search looking for above average defensive second baseman that's also got at least average contact and eye and above average power. And you can see there's only 5 players that meet that criteria, including our own Danny Ruiz, who's going to be headed to free agency. Matthew Shipman from the White Sox is almost 32 years old, not as good defensively, making a good amount of money. I don't think he's the answer. Gilberto Romero from the Royals is fragile, almost 36, going to be 36 before the season starts. I like the bat, but another guy who is making huge money at $32 million a year. And he's definitely attainable in trade. Kansas City would like to get that contract off of their books. But I don't love the age. I don't love the fragility. Willie Boykin of the Dodgers is not as good defensively as Ruiz is. Does have a promising bat. He's younger. He's not going to cost much in terms of money, but he's a lot to get in terms of a trade. And then Julio Castillo, you may remember him from our playthrough with the Pirates, was a Rookie of the Year, 2047, late in our run with the Pirates. Respectable defensively, would prefer better range, certainly, for a second baseman. Really nice bat, obviously hitting 287, almost 30 homers, 126 ribbies last year. He's an Iron Man in terms of his injury proneness. The issue is that the trade market for him, I'll just illustrate this. If we give up the top 5 prospects in our system in terms of overall potential, they still say that they won't do the deal with us. So the price on him is just prohibitive. So when I look at the rather potentially uninspiring free agent market at second base, and then I just look at the players who meet the criteria we're looking for, I think what we want to do is bring back Danny Ruiz. He's not a $28 million a year player, but he does have exceptional defensive versatility, and he's very good at a lot of different defensive positions. Quite honestly, he is a player who we could end up moving to third base also if we, for whatever reason, found another second baseman. We could probably supplant Ortega with Ruiz at third base, where he probably has a real good profile as a third baseman defensively. The range and error are a little lower than ideal for a second baseman at this point in his career, but the other reason I do like having him around is that he's also an excellent defensive outfielder. So he just gives us a ton of versatility on the team if we do have some injuries, and the only thing we need to do to bring Ruiz back is offer him money. So I'm going to try to piece together a contract for somewhat less money than he's looking for. And I don't know whether or not Ruiz will go for this. He was looking for $27.7 million a year for 4 years. We're offering him about $24.4 million for 4 years. And he's looking for more money, and he's actually increased his demand. So I want to bring him on board. I just kind of want it structured so this upcoming year is relatively inexpensive, since that's the only year that we really care about. All right, so we've upped the average to $26.25 million a year. Still not willing to bite, so we're going to have to get closer to his number at this point. He's back down to what his original demand was. And we're now going to offer him $27.5 million for 4 years. Again, I can be a little more casual with this than I typically would be, because I know I'm only playing 1 more year. So we're getting him for a little less than he's looking for next season. I assume he'll go for this offer. All right, so we've got $20 million outstanding to him, which would take care of our second base need, potentially give us a third baseman that we're looking for if somehow another second baseman magically materializes over the course of the offseason. So now I think it's time, before we start moving forward towards finding out the resolution of our arbitration eligible players, to see if there's something we can do in terms of pitchers. And since we like but don't love the potential free agent pitcher class, we kind of did the same trick here, and we tried to look for someone who could be a really good Colorado pitcher with 60-plus stuff, 70-plus movement, and 55-plus control. And as luck would have it, there's only 5 players in baseball who meet those criteria. 3 of them are on our team already, although Sal Lofton will be leaving, given that serious injury and his ineffectiveness since we picked him up from Boston before the trade deadline. But even the 2 names that aren't on our team are familiar names to us. Omar Jones was our closer a couple of seasons ago. He's also injured, out for 9 to 10 months with a torn flexor tendon, so I don't think that's the answer. But Tyrone Colbert is a guy who we had in our bullpen for a couple seasons, I think maybe 3 years. Yeah, 49 to 50, 51, so the first 3 years of our playthrough. So we moved on from him right before we started winning World Series. He was a player who hit free agency. He wanted to be a starter. We wanted to use him as a reliever. So the Mets brought him on board. They promised him a role as a starting pitcher. He's angry because they have not actually done that. As you can see, he started only 11 games each of the last 2 years. He hasn't been incredibly effective, but he does have the movement that we love, the extreme ground ball tendencies, the ground baller pitcher type. And when we look at his pitching stats, although he's been a below average-ish pitcher over the course of his career, his FIP minus in his 3 years in Colorado of 82 was actually pretty good, and his ERA plus in Colorado was also the best that it's ever been in his career. And we've improved our defense, I think, over the couple of years since he left. So honestly, I kind of like him as much as any of the potential free agent pitchers out there. He's making a lot of money. It's just a matter of how reasonable are the Mets in terms of potentially moving on from him, and how much of his salary can we get them to eat. And yeah, they just want to get the salary off the books, so they'll trade him for basically anything. We certainly don't want to be taking on a reliever making 18 and close to 22 million the next few years, although again, we only really care about the 18 next year. But if they're willing to eat a good chunk of his contract, if we add in a few more legitimate players into the deal, that could be something that works out for us. And we've pieced together a deal that I think makes sense. They'll keep 65% of his contract. We have to give up Callum Atchison, who's a useless prospect. Juan Sanchez, another useless prospect. And then we do have to give up Alex Ramirez, shortstop, decent prospect. We still think he's a 3-star potential player, but he's almost 23 years old now, and he's only made it to high A ball, where he hit a .183 this year. You can see if he fully develops, he still could be a useful major league hitter. But he's almost 23 years old, and his contact is 35. His home run power is 25. His eye and his avoid strikeouts are both 35. Despite the good work ethic, I just don't think he's ever going to really develop. Do like his durability. Don't love him defensively as an infielder just because his range is not that great. So I don't mind throwing him in. Again, I'm not thinking totally long-term with this team. I'm not trying to game the system. I'm not just going to trade away all of our prospects for one player. I don't think that would be realistic in terms of leaving the team for whoever the next general manager is in good condition. But we certainly are trying to win next year, and Ramirez, I don't think, is a great long-term prospect. He could develop into something in the coming years, but I don't think he's going to develop into anything so great that we wouldn't want to make this trade. So we're going to go ahead and bring Tyrone Colbert on board, and that should really free us up to just focus on position players at this point. Certainly if we can add a big-time pitcher, we obviously will do that. But as we just saw, I don't know that there's any big-time pitchers available who kind of meet the criteria that we're looking for. We've kind of already got all of them at this point. But I think Colbert will be a nice addition to the team. So now I think I'm going to also look at third basemen and catchers, just again, generic player searches rather than looking for potential free agents to see if maybe there's something to do there. And you can see we put Colbert onto the 40-man roster now. Excuse me. He slots in as a potential setup man for us. I think he could definitely compete for that closer role. probably likely with Gay and Chase Crawford, and there's certainly the opportunity that we'll add somebody else over the course of the offseason. I did do player searches for catchers and third basemen, and quite honestly, anyone that would be an upgrade over Alvarez or Ortega, the price in the trade market was just exorbitant. Again, it was like all 5 of our top prospects wouldn't get there. I think that may just be a little glitch in the game right here when the offseason starts. I think that clearly a player that would be an upgrade over Alvarez or Ortega is not going to be cheap to get in a trade, and we probably will have to give up some prospects, but I don't think that the types of players that we were looking at would be completely unattainable. So I think as the offseason goes along and teams kind of start filling out their rosters, maybe the price on some of those players will become more reasonable, and maybe somebody unexpected ends up on the free agent market or the trade market for some reason. So going to kind of bide my time on those things. So at this point, we'll start moving towards award season and finding out what we hear from the players that we've made arbitration offers to, as well as the free agent offer that we've made to Danny Ruiz. Our fan interest is over 100 at this point after winning the World Series last year, so any positive fan interest metrics that we do get from signing players is just going to give us a little more insurance for when we do inevitably lose Fields, Rodriguez, Young, as well as Loera, Lofton, and Demetrius Washington. Some of those guys are pretty popular players and will probably take a hit when they do sign with somebody else. And we are starting to get some of our minor league free agents signed, as well as you can see Alex Ortega got signed. Adam Fields, who's certainly going to be getting some MVP votes, got signed, so that's a boost to fan interest. Danny Ruiz signed the extension, and the fans are excited about that, so that's good. So we've got our second baseman penciled in for next year. As I mentioned, there is a potential that we could, if we find another good second baseman or shortstop, potentially move Ruiz to third base to take over for Ortega, which would still be upgrading our team overall. But with his defensive versatility, really glad to have him on board. Will Lucio gets an extension. Bobby Perez avoids arbitration. Israel Amaze avoids arbitration. You can see we're trying to fill out some coaches. So the signing of Danny Ruiz was big. And right now, we've also signed all of our arbitration-eligible players. So clearly, with the boosts that we've got, our fan interest is well over 100 at this point. Looks like we still may have over $20 million when we head into free agency. And now there's no huge holes. We need a backup catcher and a utility infielder, which we can certainly get for over $20 million. And if there's an opportunity that emerges in the coming months to add a starting catcher and or a starting third baseman instead of a backup catcher and utility infielder, then we would certainly look to take advantage of that. And we could potentially tweak our scouting and development budgets down a little bit if there was a situation where we needed to take on a bunch of salary. And we brought on a new pitching coach onto our team, Cody Rock, who just accepted our offer. A 59-year-old. He's been a AAA pitching coach for about a decade, as you can see, before losing his job last year. And he was not in baseball this year, but he's legendary at teaching pitching, outstanding at development and mechanics, excellent handling aging. I think that he's going to have average relationships overall, but importantly, really good relationships with the pitchers. And his personality also looked like it would fit in well with our team. With his works well with personable, and he struggles with easygoing. So we've got a overall favorable staff cohesion. It's ecstatic at this point, as you'd expect after winning a couple World Series in a row. So the team is starting to shape up. And we'll see who the Gold Glove Award winners are. Jose Ortega, pitcher, won another Gold Glove. He won one for us last year as well. Obviously, he won Gold Gloves each of the last 2 years, as well as World Series each of the last 2 years. And he also went 19-3 with a 3.82 ERA for us. So that was a big trade we made at the 2052 trade deadline with Milwaukee, bringing on a veteran to supplant our staff. He's going to be 32 next year. His control's below average at this point. His third pitch, the sinker, is only kind of an average pitch at this point. Could be at the point where he starts to regress a bit, but nice to see him win a Gold Glove award. And that was it for the team. Overall, our defense was solid, but only Ortega, the pitcher, actually gets the hardware this year. I would tend to think tomorrow with the Silver Slugger, or actually 2 days from now with the Silver Slugger, I think we've got a few pretty strong candidates there. And it does look like we got at least one Silver Slugger winner, hopefully more than that. Shortstop Jordan Casares. I was not expecting that to be one of them, particularly because he ended up losing his starting job to Israel Mays when we brought Mays on board. But Casares did hit 326 and 322 at-bats, and I guess that was enough. And right fielder Bobby Perez, 241 average, 32 homers, 126 runs scored. Really nice season for him. And then, not surprisingly, Adam Fields, 46 homers, 138 ribbies, and hit 322. Manny Fernandez, who almost won a Triple Crown, led the league in batting average and runs batted in, one among first basemen. Our first baseman, Elijah Moore, all he did was hit 61 home runs to likely set the clean National League record and also prevent Manny Fernandez from winning the Triple Crown. But despite the incredible season Elijah Moore had, he is not one of our 3 Silver Sluggers in 2053. Probably the least surprising news of the year, manager Nick Hartman, who we have signed to an extension, named the manager of the year this year. You got to win 113 games, win a second consecutive World Series. You're probably going to be a manager of the year most seasons. So not a shock to see Hartman win the manager of the year. We definitely don't have a chance at MVP. We know that's going to go to the Cardinals player. I don't know that we're going to win a Cy Young award. I don't think that we will, but I think between the season that we already talked about that Ortega had and the season that our ace Dave Alvarado had, I think we are going to have some guys who get some votes there. It could end up being a situation where whoever wins the Cy Young award only has 12 or 14 first place votes. Don't know that we're going to get to that total with either of our guys, but we'll sim ahead a day and find out. And we'll check in on the 4 big awards. And kind of funny, in the American League, our former ace, Andres Eretzeri, who we faced off against in the World Series, won a Cy Young award at the age of 39 for the White Sox, 15-3 with a 2.47 ERA. So interesting to see a player who came up in the Colorado system and was our ace in the very early stages of the playthrough before we moved on from him for age and salary and health reasons, come back and have a Cy Young Award winning season at the end of his career, kind of similar to what we got from Rogelio Loera last year. National League Cy Young Award winner, actually another one of our former players, Sean Street, actually had a dominant performance with 26 first place votes. Hadn't looked that closely to see the candidates. Nice season, 13-5, led the league with a 2.36 ERA as well as a 61 FIP minus and a 6.4 WAR. So not surprising. Dave Alvarado, as we expected, did get some votes. 18-5, 2.95 ERA, over 200 strikeouts, and a 5.9 WAR for our ace. So good to see him get 4 first-place votes. And Ortega actually didn't get any votes. Another one of our former players, Devin Smith of the Pirates, finished 4th in the voting. So the pitching staff that we had put together 5 to 10 years ago in Pittsburgh is still helping them remain a pretty respectable team. American League MVP went to Edgar Simpson of the White Sox, 327, 45, 104. Really nice season for him. Can see some familiar names: Rich Gilbo, Isaiah Hill, and Andres Eretzeri among the leading vote getters. And no surprise that Manny, the Raging Bull Fernandez, unanimous Cy Young Award winner, unanimous MVP winner, when he's only one home run away from a triple crown. Our Elijah Moore, who we talked about, kind of finished second in the MVP voting behind Manny Fernandez, second in the Silver Slugger voting behind Manny Fernandez. So leads the league in home runs for a second straight season. Finished second in the MVP voting last year, second in the MVP voting again this year, despite an incredible season. Adam Fields, the young DH, 322 average, 46 homers, 138 ribbies. We've signed him to his arbitration extension, but he got a bunch of first place votes. Had Danny Ruiz, who we just brought back as a free agent, got some votes. Left fielder Robbie Carrillo, pitcher Dave Alvarado, right fielder Bobby Perez all also received some MVP votes. So the Rockies, after a great season, not surprisingly, were very well represented in the MVP voting, although obviously it was Fernandez with his incredible season who got the award. And with award season done, salary arbitration, we've got everything settled. We're going to move on from Baena, so we're going to go ahead and officially give him no offer, so let him become a free agent. We're not going to make a big offer to Fields. We're not going to make any offers to Rodriguez or Young. Certainly not going to submit QOs to any of them. So at this point, I think we'll sim up through arbitration, sim to the start of free agency, and then take a quick look at who's actually on the market before we finish up this episode. And we've made it to the beginning of free agency. Take a look at the international free agents first, see if anyone piques our interest. At least at a high level, relief pitcher Fu Kang King certainly seems broadly interesting. 3.5-star potential, but we've got low scouting accuracy on him, and his movement is not great, so I don't think he is the answer for us as a closer. Looks like some decent prospects. Julio Sanchez from Cuba. Now, this is a guy who could be interesting to us. Unfortunately, we are low scouting accuracy on him right now, but we will request a scouting report. It's going to take 3 weeks, unfortunately, but ground ball tendencies, great movement on his pitches, 2 well above average pitches with a sinker and a slider, plus stuff, plus control, great personality in the clubhouse. He could definitely be an arm that could help our bullpen. The demand is something we could certainly handle. He's going to be someone we're going to need to think seriously about and hopefully get a better scouting report on him sooner rather than later. At the very least right now, he's looking for $7.6 million a year. We'll initially just offer him a minor league contract. I know he's not going to go for that, but basically we're just trying to keep him from signing with anybody else and just keep the lines of communication open until we get a more accurate scouting report on him. But he could be a pretty useful pitcher for our bullpen if those ratings turn out to be correct. The major league free agents, a lot of names that we're familiar with here. Rogelio Terrazas, we've talked about. Isaiah Hill, former great player on our Pittsburgh teams. Demetrius Washington coming off of our team. Mario Lafrosia, who's a reliever that we've looked at in the past. There are definitely some interesting players who are going to be available. Broadly looking at the pitching, Julio Sanchez certainly stands out. We're already scouting him, as we talked about, but in terms of the movement that we want, definitely an interesting prospect. Victor Fields looking for a ton of money. Sean Fluellen going to be more reasonable. Don't love his lack of control. So there are some definite pitchers for us to think about. Looking at the second baseman, no obvious players we have to go after. You know, we could end up with a Caceres or a Castillo back on the team as a utility infielder for us when all is said and done, possibly. Third baseman looks like largely a similar crew of players who are out there. And then catcher, I think the pickings are going to be slim, and yes, they definitely still continue to look pretty slim. So we're going to have to give some thought to where we want to put our money. We've got about $20 million that we can spend, so we certainly could bring on the free agent reliever and still have definitely more than enough money for a utility infielder and a backup catcher. The big question as we go through the offseason and free agency is whether we want to kind of renew those searches that I talked about earlier in the episode and see if there's someone we can potentially bring on board in a trade who's going to be an upgrade for us at those positions. So I don't think it's going to be an incredibly exciting free agent period for the Rockies this year. We're bringing back most of a team that just won it all, so we don't have to make wholesale changes. But we certainly do have some money to make some improvements to the roster. And given that we are going to be all in on the 2054 season, trying to win a third title in a row, we're going to do everything possible to bring on as much talent as possible. And we will continue our quest to do that with free agency being open in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.